Welcome to Mental Health Monday. I'm so glad that you all have joined us, and I'm glad to have a guest here who's able to tell us all about mental health and how to remain positive during this pandemic. My guest today is Dr. Adrienne Dixon. She is a clinical psychologist. She is a mother. She is a grandmother. She is a servant of the Lord, and I'm glad to have it today. Dr. Dixon, will you greet the people watching on social media?
Hello, everyone, and thank you, Brother Antonio, for having me here today. I was excited when you reached out and talked about wanting to do something around this topic and how we respond to it in this challenging time.
Thank you. The pleasure is all mine. Before we begin, I want to do it the right way this time and give proper due and respect to our pastor who may be watching. Shout out to Bishop Jesse and Lady Sandra Gavin for giving us this opportunity and for showing us how to do ministry holistically, not just spiritually, but they're also concerned about our physical and our mental health as well as financial. And so we thank God for the two of them who lead the way in everything that we do. And so, again, we thank God for them. I want to get into our discussion today, Dr. Dixon, and it's centered around some pre questions that I submitted to you. And I want to talk about how important is mental health and what all does it consist of?
So for me, when you talk about mental health, I actually like to talk about it in a different context. For me, I like to describe it as being mental well-being. And, so mental health simply means how we're able to take care of those emotional needs, and that is on a continuum. And anywhere on that continuum could be on one far end, which means that we're not, that our mental needs may need more attention, to the other end, which means that we have really good, a very good, strong sense of of mental well-being. And that, again, you look to get some balance somewhere on that continuum. But I think what's more important is that all of us, irregardless of our background and who we are, can fall on that mental continuum, can fall anywhere, depending on what experiences we have and how we're able to access our support systems and our resources.
Thank you. And when you talk about falling on that spectrum, can you talk about how events like this, how this coronavirus can contribute or be detrimental to some's mental stability?
Well, I think that, it's the virus in and of itself is not so much the issue. I think there are a number of factors that play into the pandemic that we are experiencing. And the first part, or the first dynamic for me, and I feel like I've been responding to most importantly, is that it has raised a level of fear that people who may have received either faulty information or are struggling to interpret the information, that level of fear creates increased anxiety and stress, and that can wear on the tools that we have to provide stability in our lives, and can create some fracture points for us in terms of emotionally how we balance and how we handle that. I think the other thing is that because of some of the restrictions and the parameters that's been set, that our typical coping strategies may have been limited or impaired on some level. So many times people are used to doing things, going to the gym or connecting with others, taking walks together, doing things in a way that might pull on those social resources, spending time with folks in a much more intimate, social context. Whereas now, because we're being encouraged to pull back from that so that we're not either affecting others or that we ourselves are not in a vulnerable position, that really limits that. So the traditional way in which we would socially engage with one another. And so that may be very frustrating. It may be very stressful, and it may have an impact on how we're organizing our thoughts or how we go about getting those emotional needs met.
Thank you for that. I want to transition and talk about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I think that's very important, and that will help us kind of put this whole thing into context.
Well, I think, Maslow's need, first of all, is like, if you've ever seen the pyramid where in school they would talk about the nutritional qualities that just go up the chain and where they fall. It's really an emotional pyramid. And so it talks about who we are as human beings and how we relate to one another, how we go about getting our needs met. And it really is a model that's intended to really explain when those pieces are not in place, what happens, or how things may have an impact, good, bad, or indifferent on us as individuals. Maslow really talked about there's some very unique foundational pieces in our development that are critical, that really speak to and build upon, that allow us to really have an optimum experience in life, or to maximize this quality of life experience. He called it self-actualization, that you have these attachments and these resources and things put in place that allow those things to be built upon. As human beings, all of us want to be connected to someone, and we want to feel safe and secure. And basically what Maslow was saying is, if you have people worried about where I'm going to eat or where I'm going to sleep, it's very difficult to think about what my future is going to look like. And I believe that there's lots of truth in that, in terms of what Maslow talked about, and really spoke to helping us have an understanding or appreciation about how we develop over time. When you think about it contextually from a spiritual lens, that you see many times folks, particularly folks who of Christian descent or align themselves with the Christian faith, that the core relationship with Christ and with God, their spiritual man being, or their spiritual being, is what is the foundational piece. And then those other things then are built upon that. And that's where you see some variation from what Maslow talked on a developmental level, to where theology or faith-based, I shouldn't say theology, but faith-based principles would speak to people, particularly those who have Christian faith.
Thank you for that. You talked about it, and so I want to dive into it. Can we speak of the correlation between psychology and theology?
Well, I think that, there's been lots of questions for centuries about how these two dynamics intersect, or these two um, tenets would intersect. I think when you look at the tenets of theology that goes about explaining, or an attempt to explain, human behavior and thinking, or I should say psychology that looks at explaining human behavior and thinking, from developmental pieces like Maslow, Erickson, Piaget,
Right.
to also looking at the other side of that, of what you're talking about, theology, the explaining of mankind and the very existence to who we are. And, though there are some similarities in terms of how they go about trying to explain who we are as people and how we go about getting our needs. One is explaining it in terms of trying to understand the spiritual context and how those things interrelate. And not that psychology necessarily is any different. It has more of an emphasis on scientific facts and premises, and being able to demonstrate and prove that these relationships exist, versus theology that's going to pull more from the philosophical lens.
Thank you for that. Now,
Mhm.
what are some signs of depression for some people who may be experiencing maybe sad seasonal affective disorder? What can we look for?
Right.
Those of us who are trained as maybe you are.
So, there's some variation in terms of when we think about depression. We often use that word in a very broad stroke or very broad context about being depressed. But as you just pointed out, there are some folks that may suffer with seasonal affective disorder, some folks who may suffer with, major depression. And then there may be things that can be depressed feelings or anxiety that come out of trauma experiences or abrupt experiences, like what we're experiencing now. This experience that is now global, this pandemic has potentially um, identified or heightened people's anxiety, sense of stress, and even depressed features because, again, their ability to move and engage with one another in their communities is drastically different than the way that they experienced before. When you talk about looking at the signs of depression, again, that's really dependent, it's really individually driven, so it can look different for different people. When we talk about, for example, the seasonal affective disorders, you oftentimes will have, for example, those, because we're in the northern part of the country, people who are from the south or from other parts that are very warm and they're used to bright sunshine may have a difficult time here, particularly in the winter months when it's darker, when there's not a lot of sunlight, when it's cold. So those are dynamics that you might experience that people have at different points of seasons. In the wake of this pandemic, a lot of times, or most recently, people are really experiencing symptomology around, again, an increased fear, feeling very stressed. There's lots of dynamics that's happening in terms of people who have been furloughed from their place of
Right.
employment. Their children are not in their normal routines and going to school, and there's not always congruent information sometimes, and that in and of itself can reinforce that faulty thinking, and then can also reinforce that heightened sense of depressed mood and anxiety. And so it can look really different. It could be, I feel sad, I'm crying a lot, I don't want to talk, I'm withdrawing from things that I might enjoy outside of the context that we have limitations on us. Or it could mean I'm angry a lot and I'm agitated a lot, I'm eating a lot, or I'm not eating at all. And so I think the key piece here is when we find ourselves engaging in behaviors or experiencing feelings and thoughts that seem to be different or contrary than the way that we would normally engage, then that may be something we want to just take a look at. It doesn't necessarily mean that there's a problem, but it's something to pay attention to. And I think, again, the other thing I really want to say is in the wake of all of this, it's normal to feel a little anxiety or to feel a
Indeed.
little
Yes.
stressed. I mean, we are feeling stressed. This is a real thing. The problem is if it continues to go on, that it starts to create dysfunction in the way that we're able to move about our day or to get our needs met. That's when it becomes problematic.
And you talked about children, their daily activities have been interrupted. How could this affect children as opposed to adults? Do you think there is a bigger stress put upon children because they may be used to a daily routine?
Well, that's an interesting question and one that I'm not sure that I have the answer for. In some ways, I could say potentially. In other ways, I would say that kids tend to be much more flexible and more resilient than we are as
In some
adults.
cases,
Uh,
yes.
so as adults, sometimes it's really difficult for us to make those changes more quickly and more smoothly than children do. I will say though, for all of us, whether we're talking about children and or adults, that it would be important to have a routine develop that this has the potential to really create disruption in our sleep patterns and how we're able to get rest and we go about taking care of our needs. So I think as much as possible, if we can establish a routine, a schedule, get up in the morning, do similar things. If you would normally go to work, what other things can you replace that would be productive and help you to stay on top of and sharpen your skill sets? Or it's maybe for parents who are home with young ones, if they're not in school, this might be the school work time that you're engaging with them, incorporating activities that will reinforce and continue to sharpen their sense of academic success, from reading to math, whatever that might be. But also for yourself, looking at things that we can do to continue our own growth and our own development in multiple ways. And so again, I think for those who are faith believers, it might be spending some time in meditating and reading, from that perspective, to also in your secular lives, just continue to read and develop your skill sets in your particular area of expertise or specialty.
Thank you for that good sound advice. So for those who may be experiencing stress or sad, what can they do? What are some resources that they can engage in that may be able to provide them with some assistance?
Right. Here in Erie County, we have a resource that's called the 411. If you call it, it's a resource where it replaces the old phone book directories or calling in the information line. And it really was done with the intent to be supportive to the community, to say, we don't want folks really, struggling about trying to identify a resource. So if you call that line and it's supported through the United Way as well, that they will put you immediately in touch with an organization or a provider that can address the needs that you're expressing at that time. I think, so that's a formal thing that you can do, reach out. And oftentimes I think sometimes our pride or our false sense of resiliency keeps us from reaching out and looking for help. But we should, that really is a quality of or a trait of resilience when we're able to say, hey, I need some help. I need to see what's going on. I need to reach out. I think so. That's a formal way we can do it, but informally, we can reach out to one another. Um, so, oftentimes, if you're talking with others, you have family members, you have friends. My hope is, if even if they begin to see that there's some variation in how you would normally function, that they would highlight that for you or support you in terms of being able to look for what those resources are. But we can always reach out in terms of that way. I think if that is a little intimidating for you, or or you're concerned about it, even our primary healthcare physicians, I think
Right.
reaching out to them, who are well skilled and oriented about what the resources are in the community. And sometimes it may be just really trying to figure out what deciphering or discerning, is it physically that there's something going on? Because there are physical ailments or conditions that can also simulate those emotional feelings or dysregulation that we may have as well.
And I think, and I don't want to speak for everyone, but I think majority of the people, they pay attention to depression in the stage of physical signs. Well, okay, your hair's not brushed, or maybe you haven't showered in a few days.
Hmm.
So it's good that you pointed out those other things to pay attention to.
Right.
And so, if you don't have anything else, Dr. Dixon, I want to thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to make this happen. Again, last week we had some technical difficulties, so I thank you for agreeing to come once again. Would you like to have any closing remarks?
I think just in closing, what I would say to people is that, in this time that there's definitely lots of concern, and there's lots of uncertainty about when things will shift and when things will change. But I really would encourage people that during this time is that, we can't always have all of the answers, and we may not know. And so particularly people of faith, you walk by faith and not by sight. So
Right.
focus on the things that you can have control over, and the things that you're able to maneuver, and allow those other things, put them in your faith walk. So picking up that shield of faith and saying that I'm going to walk this, I'm going to do the things that I'm being told, and taking the medical advice and the advice of the experts in the field, and not allowing myself or my family to be at greater risk. And I think the pastor has said this repeatedly, don't, be practical, be sensible. And so using those other skill sets, those skill sets that allow us to have discernment and to move in that. And then I would also say that just because we have some limitations put on us doesn't mean that we can't take care of ourselves. And if you're like me, I'm a snacker, so I had to like watch that, if I, the kind of snacks. So
Right.
eating apples or more healthy snacks, and getting up when there's opportunity to take walks, and to get some exercise. So get moving so that and it may just be sitting in a chair, whatever it is, just, moving and staying functional in that way. And I would also say, making sure that you are having meaningful attachments with people. Don't isolate yourself. I had a great virtual social hour with my children on last Friday that we were all just connected via Zoom and just, talking about things where we could see one another and having that interaction. So making sure that you're having those meaningful, connections. And then lastly, what I would just say is just making sure you set boundaries, that there needs to be parameters around our time. If we're just hanging out and we're not engaging in some kind of structure, it's very difficult to maneuver. And that in and of itself can fuel more lethargic mood and activity, and so that kind of depressed spirit can come on us. I think that it's healthy to make sure that you're spending time, appropriate time, relaxing, doing, engaging in meaningful activities like meditating, reading, those kinds of things, spending time with your family. So making sure that we're putting appropriate, healthy boundaries and limiting the amount of time that we allow ourselves to be immersed in terms of the media and the news about what they're saying, because I think it can
Yes, that's very
um,
important.
trigger that sense of fear and stir us in ways that are really unhealthy. And so again, limiting that and putting some healthy boundaries on that, and being, again, pick up that shield of faith and trusting and believing, but again, being practical about what we do. I think if we do those things, then that really speaks to our ability to maintain a good sense of mental health, mental well-being.
Thank you for that. I appreciate it. Just before we close the live, I want to let you know that if you enjoy this type of content and you want to see more stuff like this, share this, shoot us a message so that we can provide you with more content. And thank you for tuning in today. God bless you all.